In the late 2000s, part of the Worksite strategy was doing larger scale enforcement actions where we were not only targeting egregious employers, but also targeting the illegal workers that had gained the illegal employment, usually through fraud or other means. Those operations sometimes were smaller in scale, but the larger ones involved hundreds of law enforcement officers, extremely expensive. It definitely cast a large media presence. There was a lot of interest in what was going on there, how many individuals were working, how many were apprehended, and the means and methodology on how that case came to be. Some of those cases resulted in $1 million settlements. Other ones may not have necessarily been a criminal violation, because that's the issue with the law. If the employer is not knowingly hiring the workers and their I-9s are filled out properly, they could still have hundreds of illegal workers in their employment, all due to the fake documents and the imposter and identity fraud that goes on there. But the large-scale operations don't seem to be happening in the past few years. That's a shifting of priorities. The only thing that does dissuade is that the illegal workers aren't being arrested at all, so there is very little deterrent there. When the operations are happening, there was a fear, which is difficult to see sometimes, but there was a fear that working illegally could cause you to be arrested. Nowadays, that likelihood is much lower. The larger operations, when we would do those, were usually predicated either on a complaint from the public, which could be anything. It could be, a disgruntled former boyfriend or girlfriend. It could be a lawful worker that was terminated or laid off, and they knew that there were unauthorized workers in the plant and felt that they were, they lost their job because they weren't willing to accept less than minimum wage to continue working there. And some of the other ones are actually predicated from other criminal angles. Interviews of detained criminals in jail. Someone was arrested for DUI over the weekend. They're lodged. An ICE officer was in a detention center interviewing the intake line. They saw they had an employment ID, but know they're unauthorized to work. That could lead to a case. It could be a human smuggling van load that was stopped coming over a highway by a state trooper. Referral to ICE, and they realized that those workers are all going to a certain employer or a certain area where they were going to be employed. Once the predication is set, usually it would be any number of ways. It could be started proactively by going in and getting the I-9 forms and then seeing how many had suspect documents, or it could be more of a covert operation where we start by doing surveillance, looking at cars coming in, running tags, old gumshoe type of work leading up to that. Interviewing individuals, looking at other external database records that may show that there is a large concentration of unauthorized workers. Looking at prior history of that plant or managers in that plant, if they've already been inspected, audited, or investigated for violations. So it's any number of ways that could do it. But then in the planning stage was really, looking at how many workers are there. Do we have criminal violations? That's what we always wanted in targeting the egregious employers is, are we looking at criminal violations, or are we just looking at, a lot of fake documents? Another area in as well is there a document vending ring in that area? We would get calls from FedEx and U.S. Mail that they intercepted large numbers of Social Security cards being sent to a certain house, and then rolling back into the plant after we arrest the document vendor that, everyone I sell to gets a job at the ABC factory down the street. So that's how we really get into the larger type of cases. During the larger scale operations, it was always in consultation with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We'd be looking to get our probable cause to get a search warrant. You wouldn't want to detail a few hundred agents at the cost of thousands and thousands of dollars out to an area and then not have a warrant. So you would always want to know, with the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're in support of it. They're in support of prosecuting any meritorious criminal cases that are discovered during the execution of the warrant. That could be identity theft cases, that could be harboring, shielding, employer-type cases, and in some cases it could be criminal aliens that have re-entered the country illegally, assumed another name, and are working at the plant. So it was all done in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then once we had acknowledgement that they would move forward with the prosecution or with the application for a search warrant, then massive planning stages would begin at ICE, and it involved dozens and dozens of pages of operation forms, recruiting individuals, making sure everyone had the proper equipment, the proper training, humanitarian services on board, whether that be not only medical, but ensuring that there weren't single mothers that were taken from their children, setting up alternatives to detention for individuals that had humanitarian or medical type cases. There was an unbelievable amount of planning that went into those operations before we would even consider sending the first few agents out to the site to execute a warrant. After the workers are taken into custody during one of those operations, they're interviewed on site to ascertain if they have any of those humanitarian or medical issues. Is there medication? Is it at home? Do they have unaccompanied minors that are at school or with a babysitter? In those cases, individuals are usually given an alternative to detention. That could be a phone number that they have to call into on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It could be an ankle bracelet so that they're monitored. Other individuals that don't have equities and were what we determine a flight risk were usually put into detention, and they had the option of hearing before an immigration judge within a certain amount of time, or they were usually given, unless they were convicted criminal aliens, they were given an option of electing a voluntary departure. A voluntary departure or voluntary removal would be one where they didn't contest the facts that they were in the country illegally, and they could be expeditiously removed from the country without the penalty of being formally removed. When you're formally removed, which is usually done by an immigration judge, or if you have certain felony convictions, if you're formally removed and re-enter the U.S., you can be criminally prosecuted for re-entry, and you're also barred from the country for anywhere from 10 years to life, depending on the removal charge. If an individual opted for a voluntary departure or voluntary removal, those penalties would not be in place as long as they timely left the country. So you had individuals that were released on site for certain reasons, you had individuals that were detained pending a hearing, and you would have individuals that were elected to be voluntarily returned to their country that would be removed within a few days. The advantages of the large-scale operations are they actually get people's attention. Illegal workers would have a fear that they may be apprehended while working illegally in the country. Employers see that they're actually losing workers in one swift hit, that they may lose 20, 30, 50, 60% of their workforce, which can have adverse business conditions, and that may encourage employers to really scrutinize their books, do a little more than what the law requires, and have a true compliance program that relates to the I-9 process and the hiring process regarding legal and illegal workers. Those are the advantages. The disadvantages are when you do those large-scale operations, they cost a lot of time and a lot of money. And in effect, you probably can't target as many employers as you would want if you have several hundred agents out for 4 and 5 days in a week at a certain plant, processing the workers and processing the search warrant scene where the operation took place. So that would be the significant disadvantage to doing the larger scale operations.